What if the most decisive scene in Tom Hardy's life was never committed to film? What if the turning point that forged the man beneath the stardom unfolded where cameras were forbidden, in a windswept cabin on the edge of the Arctic Circle, witnessed only by a dying soldier and a secret sealed for 16 years? Picture Hardy now, the face you've memorized from blockbuster posters, slumped in a third-class seat on a budget flight, bound for Reykjavik, chewing at the inside of his cheek the way he does on set when the director calls cut, but the character refuses to let go. Nobody around him knows he's traveling under a discarded alias. Nobody knows about the crumpled letter in his coat pocket, just 6 clipped words and a name scratched beneath them. Stage 4, come alone, Clark. No surname, no return address, yet the single syllable weighs more than any award Hardy has hauled across a red carpet. Clark was once his sergeant, his compass, his closest friend in a desert outpost. The tabloids never bothered to map. They survived everything except the one night Hardy was ordered off patrol, and Private Callum Price, 19, impossibly hopeful, took his slot. Price never returned. Hollywood would later applaud Hardy's gift for portraying haunted men. They never realized he was hiding the prototype deep inside. For 6 months, Hardy ignored the letter, stuffed it inside a screenplay draft, told himself the ache in his chest was just another character refusing to leave. Then the dreams started, Clark's voice cracking over radio static, Callum's photo half buried in sand, a countdown that Hardy could never stop. 2 weeks later, he bought a one-way ticket to Iceland under the alias Edward Brooks and disappeared from every press schedule, every agent's calendar, every gossip feed that fed on him. He could have sent flowers, recorded a voicemail, hired an aide to deliver apologies he was too proud to voice. Instead, he packed one duffel, thermal layers, instant coffee, a battered copy of Rilke's Letters to a Young Poet, and vanished. On the tarmac at Heathrow, a paparazzo pointed a lens his way. Hardy turned, locked eyes, and smiled just long enough to make the man lower the camera. No photo was taken. A disappearing act requires witnesses who don't know what they're witnessing. Hours later, turbulence jolted the cabin. Passengers gasped. Hardy barely blinked. The real turbulence waited up north, inside a cabin he'd pictured every sleepless night since the letter arrived. Somewhere in that frozen silence, Clark lay counting breaths Hardy wasn't sure would last until he arrived. Somewhere in that silence, Callum's laugh refused to die, and somewhere between the two, Hardy would have to choose whether memory was a prison or a path home. The jeep that met him at Akureyri Airport rattled over volcanic gravel for 3 wind-burned hours, passing sulfur vents and lonely herds of shaggy horses. The driver, a village pastor supplementing his income, tried polite conversation, but Hardy's answers calcified into one-syllable stones. When the cabin finally emerged from a veil of snow, it looked less like a house than a scar on the landscape. Clark answered Hardy's knock with a grunt. He'd shrunk, but his gaze remained artillery grade. Oxygen tubing looped under a patchy beard. A wool blanket cloaked his shoulders. "You took your time," he said, voice rasping as though every vowel cost a heartbeat. "I always do," Hardy replied, stepping inside. The wood stove popped. 2 chipped mugs, 1 chessboard, 0 small talk. Days passed the way embers fade, slow, stubborn, glowing beneath ash. They drank instant coffee, argued through 4 bitter games. Clark still won 3, and traded insults that only men who'd shared foxholes could consider affectionate. Yet no one said Callum's name. On the 4th dawn, Hardy woke to find Clark seated at the table, a shoebox before him. "Couldn't sleep," the older man muttered. "Dreams too loud." He slid the box forward. Inside lay 2 tarnished shell casings, a photograph creased into thirds, and a battered green notebook stinking of diesel. Hardy stared at the photo. Callum in desert fatigues, squinting against sun, arms slung around Hardy's younger, cockier shoulders. The edge of the picture was singed. Souvenir of a Humvee fire, Callum once joked had given the image vintage Instagram vibes before Instagram existed. Clark tapped the notebook. His journal, he said. "Found it in the footlocker years after. I read a page, couldn't handle the rest. It's yours." Hardy thumbed the first entry. Ammunition inventories, radio checks, lists of British punk songs Callum planned to blast over tactical speakers once the tour ended. Then, near the middle, a paragraph circled in blue ink. Hardy's mad they pulled him, says it feels like deserting. Told him heroes rotate home, cowards beg to stay. He didn't laugh. "If I don't make it back, tell him I never blamed him. Unless he grows a stupid beard, then I haunt him." Hardy closed the notebook with fingertips that shook hotter than the stove. Clark watched in silence, then said, "You've been haunted long enough." That night, Hardy couldn't breathe. The cabin shrank. The walls crawled with half-remembered screams. He stepped outside into starlight so cold, it almost numbed the noise inside his head. Almost. At sunrise, he brewed coffee thick as tar and placed it before Clark. "You're coming with me?" he said. "Home?" Clark scoffed. "I left home in 2003, then to mine, London, doctors, my guest house, real sheets. You want to play redemption tour? Pick someone healthier." Clark hacked a laugh that became a cough. Hardy leaned closer. "I never carried Callum out. I can damn well carry you." Clark studied him, the frost on Hardy's lashes, the notebook clutched like scripture. Then he nodded once, a surrender sealed in fatigue more than hope. 2 days later, they boarded a chartered jet. No public terminals, no fans. In the lavatory, as turbulence rattled the fuselage, Hardy steadied Clark while the older man vomited black bile into a stainless steel sink. The actor whispered nonsense stories, set gossip, soccer scores, anything to drown the sound of retching. Clark managed a grin. Still a terrible storyteller, he croaked. Hardy's London estate became a hospital with better curtains. 2 nurses rotated 12-hour shifts. Clark spent mornings mocking Hardy's vegan smoothies, afternoons teaching Hardy's 8-year-old to shuffle a deck one-handed, and evenings on the veranda sipping whiskey he wasn't supposed to have. One damp Tuesday, he asked Hardy to bring the journal. They sat together, turning pages nobody else would ever read. Clark stopped at Callum's last unfinished sentence and traced the pen stroke that ended mid-word the night before the ambush. "We all paused here," he whispered, like the world forgot the next line. Then he closed the cover, exhaled, and said, "Let's write an ending." The next morning, he slipped away in his sleep. Hardy found him before dawn. Blanket slid to the floor, hand resting on the journal. For 5 hours, Hardy didn't move. The nurses discovered them at shift change. Hardy sitting upright, eyes open, whispering, "I got you out." The funeral was small. Hardy refused cameras, eulogies, headlines. He stood at the back the way soldiers stand at attention, rigid spine, trembling fingers locked behind him. When taps played, he pressed the photo of Callum against Clark's coffin and mouthed a promise no microphone caught. When the news finally leaked, Tom Hardy's mysterious Iceland trip, the death of an unnamed veteran, the tabloids built castles of speculation. Hardy ignored every request, but he made one phone call to his agent, turning down 2 blockbuster offers. "I've spent years selling pain," he said. "I'm done trading trauma for tickets." In the void left by silence, journalists filled airwaves with rumors of breakdowns and rehab. Hardy did not correct them. Instead, he founded the Price Clark Trust, a mental health grant program for veterans. No fanfare, no red carpets, no mention of his name on the website. He thought anonymity would shield it from celebrity glare. He underestimated the internet. Within weeks, veterans identified the foundation's anonymous benefactor by tracing a property deed Hardy had quietly transferred to the charity. News outlets lit up. Tom Hardy's secret gift. Social media crowned him a hero. Hardy felt the old walls closing in, recognition twisting pure intent into spectacle. He retreated again, this time into service, showing up unannounced at shelters, PTSD circles, halfway houses. He cooked chili for 12 men in Leeds, folded laundry at a center in Bristol, repainted a clinic's waiting room gray to match the calm inside his mind. Everywhere he went, phones tried to sneak photos. He'd smile, shake his head, and keep working. One night, on a Manchester to London train, a middle-aged commuter in a peacoat recognized him anyway. Hardy's hoodie and earbuds offered camouflage, but grief has a scent veterans can't miss. "Carry that photo everywhere?" the man asked without looking up from his paperback. Hardy didn't answer. "My brother served in Basra," the stranger continued. "He said the ones who made it back sometimes carried the dead harder than the dead carried themselves." Hardy slid out an earbud. "You lose him?" "Lost myself first," the man said. He closed the book, met Hardy's eyes, and added, "Guilt isn't proof of love, you know." The words followed Hardy off the train, through the night, into dreams where Callum asked why Hardy kept pitching a tent in the past. He needed a new ritual. He sought it in Nottingham, inside a drafty church basement, where a veterans peer group met Thursday nights. The counselor recognized him, but Hardy asked to sit anonymously. 30 minutes in, a teenager with shaking knees confessed he hadn't slept without pills in 3 years. Hardy felt his own pulse hammer. When the counselor invited him to share, he stood. "I spent 16 years believing memory was punishment," he said, voice barely above the hum of fluorescent lights. "Turns out it was a map. I just kept reading it wrong." No one applauded. Someone whispered, "Aw man." Hardy exhaled. He kept coming back. Not as Tom Hardy, actor, but as Tom, fellow traveler. He boiled coffee at midnight for panic attacks, drove a former Royal Marine to a 3 a.m. crisis clinic, sat in a hostel corridor until a 31-year-old with survivor's guilt fell asleep upright against the wall. Word spread. Hollywood called. A studio offered to bankroll a film, his script, his control, about veterans rediscovering purpose. For the first time since Clark's death, Hardy considered saying yes. Then he read the third act scene they'd slipped into the draft. The protagonist screaming in rain, photograph clenched to his chest. The cliche reeked of tickets and tears and safe distance. Hardy closed the script, phoned the producer, and said, "If there's a photo, it stays in the pocket. Real grief hides where cameras can't reach." They thanked him, promised revisions. He declined anyway. Free from the project, he filmed something else. A 15-minute documentary shot on a single handheld camera. No lighting, no boom mics, just 10 veterans sitting in a circle telling truths nobody had bothered to record. Hardy never appears on screen. His voice enters only once, at the end. If these stories shook you, don't share the link. Share the room. Find one, sit in it, be terrible at listening until you get better. Uploaded under an alias, the video reached 3 million views in 6 weeks. Most viewers never realized the silent man passing mugs of tea in the background, half visible for 2 seconds, was Tom Hardy. Autumn drifted into winter. Hardy took night walks along the Thames, sometimes barefoot on frosted grass, to remind himself the ground could still sting. One dawn, he rang his publicist and surrendered the soundbite everyone had been chasing. "I'm not disappearing," he said. "I'm distributing. Pieces of me are out there where they're needed. The films will wait." Reporters dissected the quote for hidden meaning. Meanwhile, Hardy drove north in rain that turned motorways into mirrors and parked at a cemetery outside Sheffield. Callum's stone was modest, the grass shaggy. A child's pinwheel squeaked in the wind. Hardy knelt, retrieved the journal, preserved in a watertight box, and opened to the blank page after Callum's final entry. He wrote, "I thought carrying you meant staying broken. Today I know it means staying honest. Rest easy, brother. We're still marching." He resealed the journal, buried it again, and pressed the earth flat with both palms. Then he stepped back, saluted the stone, and whispered, "At ease." Driving home, he passed a roadside inn with a faded vacancy sign. Impulse guided him inside. The owner recognized him, but Hardy requested the smallest room. He spent the night drafting letters, one to his son, explaining why service sometimes steals a father for weekends. One to the Price Clark Trust, authorizing scholarships for medics studying battlefield trauma. One to a studio head, politely refusing a cameo where his character died in slow-motion glory. 2 months later, he stepped onto a low-lit stage at a TEDx event in Salford Keys. No handlers, no teleprompter. The curator had begged for star power. Hardy offered vulnerability instead. He paced once, looked at the audience, and asked, "How many of you have rehearsed your apology to the dead more than your next conversation with the living?" Hands didn't rise, but pulses did. He told the story, not the polished press junket version, but the battered, bleeding, partial truth. He stopped before the ending, letting the silence ache with omission, then leaned into the microphone. Some stories deserve unfinished sentences. They keep us returning to the work. Zygarnik in action. He withheld the resolution, and the room leaned forward, physically needing closure that would never arrive on stage. Afterward, he vanished through a service door before applause could cage him. 3 audience members followed, cornering him in a loading dock lit by one flickering bulb. A woman in a spinal injury brace whispered, "My brother killed himself last year. I've been carrying his dog tags in my purse like a weapon. I think I understand now. They're a compass." Hardy didn't give advice. He asked her brother's name and listened. 10 minutes later, she left crying, but lighter. That night, Hardy wrote Clark's daughter, a paramedic he'd never met, detailing her father's last good months, and enclosing the chessboard they'd worn smooth. He ended the letter, "Your dad said you hated unfinished stories, so here's the last move. Checkmate." He sealed the package, smiled at the irony, finally delivering something on time, and placed it at the post office before dawn. Tom Hardy drove back to London, beneath a sky the color of dull steel, windshield wipers marking time like a metronome. The city greeted him with the usual theater of clicking shutters and craning necks, but something in his posture had shifted. Where fame once clung like wet cloth, it now slid off like rain against waxed canvas. He declined interviews about the TEDx talk. He offered no comment on the viral documentary, but on a chilly Friday evening, he slipped into a small studio in Soho at the invitation of a podcaster known for conversations, not clicks. No entourage followed. Midway through the recording, the host asked, "What do you want your legacy to be?" Hardy paused long enough that producers later worried the audio had frozen. Then he said, "I used to think legacy was what you leave behind. Now I think it's what you carry forward so others don't have to." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The unfinished thought did its work. Listeners filled the gap with their own burdens, their own companions left on distant roads. Outside, fans waited with glossy photos and permanent markers. Hardy signed everyone, but beneath each signature he added a single word: March. That spring, the Price Clark Trust reported a surge in anonymous volunteer applications. Counselors, carpenters, chefs. None of them asked for selfies. They asked where to stand, what to lift, how to serve. A magazine finally coaxed Hardy into a photo feature, promising proceeds to the foundation. The photographer captured him, not in couture, but in paint-splattered boots, shoulders slumped against a clinic wall, while veterans argued football scores behind him. In the published spread, Hardy's face is half shadow, but the caption hits brighter than any spotlight. Some heroes exit frame so others can enter. On the anniversary of Clark's death, Hardy woke before dawn, brewed 2 mugs of brutal instant coffee, and carried one outside. He set it on the garden table opposite his own, steam rising into the cool air. No words, no prayers, just room at the table for an absence now woven into daily presence. He checked his watch, as if late for formation, then whispered, "We keep marching," and drained the mug. What happens next? That part remains unwritten, and that is the gift. Because the story of Tom Hardy's quiet redemption is still unfolding in night shifts at shelters, in chess lessons for kids who lost their fathers, in journals whose last pages wait for ink. The unfinished edges compel him forward, compel us to look for the pages we've left blank in our own histories. If you're searching for the epilogue, look where cameras never go. A basement meeting, a wind-bitten cemetery, a train car at dusk where strangers trade the weight of dog tags for the lighter metal of conversation. In those places the silence finally breaks, and Tom, once master of masks, listens without needing the last word. The story continues because it refuses to close, and the march goes on precisely because one man learned that remembering isn't a prison. It's a path lit by the names we will not let disappear.